Hello, physics class. Hey, we have special guests today. Okay. Lindsay and Brandon Schmidt are with us today. They work in the Kansas City area. Lindsay is a physician assistant, KU Medical, I believe, in Kansas City. Brandon, you work for CERN.
It's a Burns McDonnell engineering firm.
Okay. And in the electrical engineering was your background, and you work in the spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum there. Yeah. So I'm going to turn over to them. They're going to tell you how they got to where they're at, what they do, and then they may have questions for you as students, like how they could help you moving forward, considering that you're at a remote location, kind of like they were when they grew up. So Lindsay and Brandon, the show is yours.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so Brandon and I recently started an organization called STEMM Fire, and we'll get into that later. But I am going to start out and talk a little bit about what I do. Brandon has more of the physics background, so he'll spend a little bit more time talking about that kind of thing that you're currently working with in class. And then hopefully, like you said, we'll have some questions for you guys to help us. I grew up around Pratt. I grew up in Iuka, actually, and graduated way back in 2003. Mr. Sharp was also my teacher. I went to K-State after that, and then to the University of Nebraska Med Center and got my PA degree. So I'm a physician assistant. I work in Kansas City at the KU Med Center and do orthopedic surgery, more specifically on upper extremities. So I just work with one physician, one surgeon, and we're in the operating room 3 days a week, in clinic 2 days a week. And we do basically any surgery that you can imagine on arms. Dr. Toby, the guy I work with, also is one of the few in our region who actually does replant surgeries. And so we, if you cut off your finger or a limb, we actually can replant those on back to your body. So let's see. I'm going to go through before I show those pictures, I think. So just quickly, physician assistant.
Hey, Miss Lindsay, real quick.
Yeah.
Make sure you're speaking up. I don't know about others. Mine's real faint, so.
We'll turn our mic volume up.
Maybe.
It's my IT specialist here. But I'll talk louder either way. So physician assistant is kind of a level between nursing and being a physician. And it requires, after your bachelor's degree in college, 2 to 3 more years of schooling to get your master's. And at that point, you can practice medicine very similar to a physician. You just need to be supervised by that physician. So I cannot just go out and start a clinic on my own. I cannot perform surgeries on my own. But I can see my own patients in clinic with the surgeon or doctor. I can assist in surgery. So I'm considered a first assist. And so whatever is needed in the operating room, if I need to do suturing or drill holes or put in screws or plates, take grafts, those are all things that I'm able to do as a physician assistant. So a lot of fun, a lot of great things that we're able to do. And maybe something that I wasn't as familiar with, in schooling. I kind of thought either you're a nurse or you're a doctor. And so is anybody actually interested in medicine here before I, nope, perfect. Mr. Sharp, perfect, thank you. So just a few pictures.
Trying to start with.
That one's fine. So just to show you a little bit of what we do, these are some operative pictures that we've taken. This patient, can you guys see that? This patient unfortunately lost their thumb. As you guys know, the thumb is pretty much the most important little appendage on your hand. Really can't do a whole lot without that if you're just working with these 4 guys. So when this happens, and it doesn't happen too infrequently, we can actually take a toe off of obviously your foot and replant it. And so go to that next one. So nice and healthy toe from the same gentleman who previously lost his thumb. And we can take that long toe, that second toe there, and actually take it out, take the bones out, make sure that the arteries and nerves are severed appropriately, and then go to the next picture. And then we can replant it onto the hand to allow for what's called a very important post. So you need something basically to be a post to be able to grip and grasp things. And that's why this surgery, although not done a whole lot, is really, really important, because this person now has a functional hand instead of requiring the use of a prosthetic or things like that, which, you know, obviously they make and they do function fairly well, but this person did very, very well. And although it looks a little bit gory right there, that's just as soon as we let down the tourniquet in the OR. You know, after recovery, did very, very well, is happy with it. It looks not maybe like a normal thumb, but something that you'd, if you don't know the person, you'd have to actually stare at to figure that out. So one of the things we do. Other things, that replant that I was talking about, yeah, that one. And then, yeah. So this is a patient who unfortunately had a little incident with a machete. She was in a fight with another person and it didn't go well for her. So she comes into our OR and yeah, and we're able to completely reattach the bones, the vessels, the arteries. We do this through an operating microscope. The vessels and the nerves and arteries are sewn up together with what's called 8-0 nylon suture, and that suture is about, depending on the size, a little bit of variation, but about the fifth the size of a hair. And our needles are about the size of your eyelash. And so we, Dr. Toby and I, work under intense loop and operating scope magnification, which blows everything up really nicely for us. And we're able to sew things back together that are essentially the size of a pencil lead. So a lot of intense work. Something like that procedure can take, 8 or 10 hours of sitting under a microscope working. And then the bigger structures, the bones can be put together with pins, screws, plates, and things like that. So, and then there's one other picture. This guy, his dad, they work in a butcher shop. His dad asked him to go clean out the whatever they're using to cut meat, and unfortunately didn't get the memo to shut it off first. So he came into us with the fingers on ice, which is always a good idea. That is something you should do if you accidentally are this person. And we're able to reattach those and make it look very nice, first of all, but also more importantly, very functional for him. So that is kind of what I do on a weekly basis. Of course, right now, not much of that is going on with COVID, but Brandon has a bunch more physics that he's involved with. So does anybody have any questions for me before we move on?
I was going to point out the clue in there where she said that 8 to 10 hours under a microscope. Our current lesson right now is on optics. Hopefully my class had a chance to play with some of the simulations. You know how light bends and refracts and magnifies. That's the application. That's why that part of the physics is important, is because
Sure.
you'll be able to do that. Yeah, those are incredible pictures, incredible stories.
Yeah, hopefully didn't gross too many people out. We've only had one person faint, so I'm glad that you all are still at least sitting and looking at.
As students, feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, by all means. That's why we're here. So
I got a question.
Sure.
Okay, so obviously you have to deal with a lot of like blood and things that a lot of people don't like to look at. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with stuff like that?
I think you are a person who either can or can't, or maybe should or shouldn't deal with that kind of thing. I think it does get a little bit easier over time, but really there are quite a few people I know who just would not, that's not their thing. And so I don't think it's a thing you can practice on and get better at. But if you can stand a little bit, usually you can stand quite a bit of it. And over time it becomes not so personal, I think. It becomes a job where you understand specifically how you can help a person. And so you don't see a bleeding extremity on an OR table. You see, okay, we can attach those arteries in that vein, and we can put that bone back together and make this person feel better and healthier. And the rest of the bloody, gory stuff just kind of fades into the background, and you don't really think about it anymore.
All right.
But for sure, it's a thing. And so if you don't love it, it doesn't necessarily get a whole lot better.
For the while when I was doing anatomy and physiology, I always wanted the students, we go to the cadaver lab just for that reason, Andreas, because I wanted them to be around a body to know whether that was even close to something they could be around. And then we had some shadowing programs at the hospital, and I had 2 people faint in the operating room. And so similar to what you were saying, they get in there and they thought they wanted it, but they got there and they're like, yeah, not so sure I want that. And I'll do something medical, but maybe not the operating room.
Right. Yep. A lot of people have those stories.
Yeah. So.
All right.
Anything else? No.
All right. So I'll take off here, I guess. My name is Brandon. I actually grew up in La Crosse, which is about, an hour and 15 minutes or so from Pratt there. Real small town again, kind of the rural background. And I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, even leaving high school and going into college. I kind of had an interest in computers. So I went the route of, okay, maybe I'll be like a computer programmer, do that kind of thing. So I went to K-State for computer engineering. And I was there probably my second year in college. I realized I don't want to do computer engineering because I don't want to sit in front of a computer my whole life and just sit there and type and program and never see anybody or never see the world. So I actually changed while I was in college from computer engineering to electrical engineering. And fortunately, most of my classes the first couple of years switched over without any issue. But when I went into electrical, then I actually specialized in power. So most of all the work I've done is actually revolving around creation and transmission generation of electricity and how to get that out throughout the power grid throughout the country. At the same time, while I was in high school towards the end, and then during the summers and breaks and stuff, I was working for a local telecommunications company. Actually, it's called Golden Belt Telephone. They're based out of Rush Center, so right there by La Crosse. Very similar. I know SC Telecom's down your way. They do a lot of the fiber and stuff out in that area. Very comparable company to SC Telecom, the smaller kind of mom and pop, 20 or 30 little towns they served. So I got a lot of good hands-on experience starting off in telecommunications. A lot of it was, working on people's phones and cable TV. And then later on, as I've been there a couple of years off and on, I'd get to go back and I started working on doing different like DSL, internet. And later we actually started putting fiber to the home in everywhere, and we were doing fiber installs in everybody's homes. So I get to do all the installation, the troubleshooting, and then even beyond that, I get to work in the central office where all the fiber comes back to and all the communications come back to, where all that main equipment is and all that gear is. I got to get hands-on experience working on the servers and all the routers and all the different, even on the RF side, the different radios we had. I got to work on all that. Just as kind of a part-time internship summer job thing, while at the same time I was going to college for power. So I graduated in high school in 2005 and then K-State in 2010. So in 2010, when I was getting out of college, that was kind of when they had a recession going on back then. It was kind of tough finding jobs at that point. So I'd been looking all around the state of Kansas for engineering jobs, something that's going to be, I looked all around Wichita, but the aviation industry wasn't very good right then. That's their main thing. So I ended up going back to Western Kansas for about a year and working at the telecommunications company again, and eventually found some opportunities up here in the Kansas City area, where the engineering firm I actually work at, I'm specialized that the main division I work at is actually for power companies, but it's doing telecommunication work for power companies. So it's like a mix of what I had done previously as well as what I'd specialized in college. It was a really good fit. And I've been there at this company called Burns McDonnell now for almost 10 years, 9.5 years, I think, at this point. So it's been a while. I'm going to pull over here on the screen share up. I'm just going to throw one of basically our department slides up here, just real quick about what we do. Just for a couple of pictures for reference, we've done these presentations a few times now, and sometimes we've used PowerPoints when we're out in front of folks, but because this is pretty heavily physics focused here, I wanted to go a little bit in depth on a few of the things we work on, especially the wireless RF piece, where we're looking at different frequencies and propagations and how really the EM side of things works. And then also on the fiber optic piece as well, because we're starting to talk about how lenses and everything work. It really comes up a lot in fiber optics as well. So those are a couple of things that I run into daily. Not necessarily designing how radios work or designing how fiber works, but being able to take the knowledge from the physics classes and the physics background and the products that people have made already and really integrate all that together and make a system design that works from end to end. So at Burns McDonnell here, we're a really big engineering firm. We do all kinds of different things, airports, roads, water treatment, do a lot for the military, oil refineries, gas plants, power plants, about anything you can think of. I just happen to be in the group that does the power distribution. So basically, any of the big power lines you see running around, in your town or out in the country, even we design and build those and the substations and such. And what I'm specialized in is the department I work in. We are trying to build a communication system out, basically a private internet for these power companies, so they can completely control the flow of electricity remotely without having to be out there on site. It kind of gets to be a big important thing when, for example, you have an ice storm that comes through. I don't know if anyone remember all the power outages we've had where power lines are down after an ice storm or other event like that happens. They can fix it and get it restored a lot quicker if they can just reroute the electricity instead of actually have to go out there and rebuild every single piece of line or manually go out to site. So that's one of the big pushes we have. The other big thing they're doing right now is they need to be able to talk to everybody, their field workers. They need to be able to communicate back to the headquarters, back to the main office, even if like all of our cell towers are down or if all the private normal communications you'd have to talk to somebody, if that's not available during a storm or during some big event, they have their own private infrastructure completely separate from what you and I get to use. So that's kind of what their whole background is for communications. But I want to bring up a couple things on wireless and fiber that I think might be kind of handy. Was Mr. Sharp, you did a lot with EM recently. Was that one of the subjects before the
did a lot with the only thing we did a lot of this year, we did a lot of mechanics, classical mechanics stuff.
Okay.
Everything else, we ran deep in the year, and we got, COVID came in, and we're kind of doing conceptual worldview stuff. Like, be aware, kind of know this about it. This is the real deal. Don't pay attention to the fake stuff.
All right. So a little bit on I guess the EM side, electromagnetic spectrum. Obviously there's the visible light. That's one of the big things. It's we work with a lot. The different lasers and lenses and stuff. We'll get into that here in a minute on the fiber, but I want to hit the RF side first. So a little bit different frequencies, but I think it's kind of important to have a little bit of background on what this is too. So you think of a cell tower, any of your cell phones, the new 5G stuff, that's all RF. It's all different radio frequencies. We are in the middle of rolling out both 4G, LTE, and 5G designs now. My department's starting to do that for different companies. We're involved with that to an extent. I guess just kind of scroll down here, all different things we work on, but electric vehicles was another big one. I saw a Tesla background there a minute ago. We are actually involved with Tesla and some of the other EV folks doing charging station design across the country now, especially in the bigger city areas, but also along the main highway arteries between populated areas, across I-70, for example, or crossing these like US 54 and these main highways, doing charger design, trying to figure out how, if our infrastructure completely changes from gas to electric, how do we make that switch and still have the facilities out there to have vehicle chargers for people traveling? Like I said, all different types of things we work on, but what I want to kind of pull up here is just actually this picture here at the top. I think we've got it on this one too. Not very good. Everyone's probably seen a cell phone tower before and what that kind of looks like. Was anyone ever seen the dishes up here on this that look like giant satellite dishes that hang off of a cell phone tower? Or paid attention to them? It's something they call microwave dish, and what that is, it's a point-to-point radio link. So you'll have maybe one side, you have one of these dishes on a tower, and maybe 10 or 15 miles away, you could be up to 30 miles away, you have a dish at the other end, they're pointing at each other. And that's a way they're getting point-to-point communications across over RF through the air without having to build anything in between. So just put a tower on each side, aim the dishes at each other, and then you can get basically internet or network connectivity across there. Speeds are a little dependent upon what frequency we're talking about. As we get into different frequencies, the lower the frequency, like you're talking like hertz, like real low frequencies, they'll go a lot further, but you can't get near as much data across them, just the way the spectrum works. As you get into a higher frequencies, like up into the gigahertz, we're talking a lot now. So everyone has probably Wi-Fi at your house. So 2.4 and 5.8 are the two frequencies you hear a lot. 2.4 is going to go through your walls better and through your house better. But 5.8 is going to have a lot more speed on it. You'll get faster signal through 5.8. Same kind of thing applies in any of the things we're doing. Outside in the bigger scheme of things, we could use a really high frequency and get a lot of speed across it, but we can't shoot as far. So that's kind of the trade-off that you see in the RF world. So what we have to do, we actually have to do studies, either a point-to-point, like a path study, to make sure there's nothing in the way of the signal, or in the other type of thing, like in the cell phone or cell tower world, if we put up a cell tower and we want to have antennas shooting out to all the area around there to cover that land area, we have to do what they call a propagation study. So I want to just pull up an example of what a propagation study is, and you can kind of see this is what they do every time they put up a cell tower. And it's going to be a real big deal. They're putting up all this 5G stuff. Well, 5G, it's all about getting more bandwidth, more speed out to everybody. So all your cell phones work faster, which means it doesn't go near as far, which means they really have to figure out where they're going to put all these new little antennas out all across the country. So I just wanted to pull up an example here of a couple of prop studies we have. So do you have any questions at this point? Sorry, I'm kind of rattling on a little fast. I need to slow down how quick I speak here probably. Yeah, go ahead, Andres.
So when you have to set up the towers and everything, they have to, the point-to-point where they have to point at each other, is there a limit to how far you can do it because of the Earth and like the curvature and everything?
Yes, there absolutely is. So curvature of the Earth definitely comes into that. So what we typically do, and I'll get that loading here in the background. It'll let me. That's what I was afraid of. Didn't want to do that. Let's see if I can flip back to this. Okay. So what we use, I think it'll work all right here. We use a couple different pieces of software to figure that out. We have some specialized software that you put in your parameters, your tower heights, your elevations and such. And then you can determine based on if there's like a hill or something, the way you load that into the software, you can determine how far you can go or how high you have to be on the tower to actually make that path work. It's not completely line of sight point to point. With RF, they actually have what they call Fresnel zones. It makes it really kind of dip down as depending on what your frequency is. It isn't like a straight point to point. It's more of an oval shape. And if that entire oval isn't encompassed, like clear, not hitting something, you'll get interference and it won't work correctly. So we'll use a couple different elevation profile tools. Basically you could use Google Earth for a basic one, and just look at it and throw your tower on each side and draw a straight line across. Are we going to hit anything? If not, okay, we have a chance. Now we actually run the full study and try to figure out, are we going to interfere with any of those actual Fresnel zones that would block part of the signal? The distance piece typically is more about whether you can get point to point with the curvature of the Earth still being there, or any obstructions like mountains or hills or trees or even buildings in the way. There's areas, for example, in the Rocky Mountains or Appalachian Mountains, you can shoot mountaintop to mountaintop. You might be shooting 60, 70 miles. You could do that. But normally we're looking at paths around 20, 25 miles, something like that, because of the obstructions you see and the curvature of the Earth. So that's a really good question. That's definitely an issue. I was going to try to load this app up that shows, basically it shows point-to-point connectivity, but for whatever reason, my app's not wanting to load. Too much bandwidth usage. Oh shoot. Let's see if I can go back just to do the other one. No, I really messed that up. I had this preloaded so it would go quicker. We've got a software program we use for a lot of design when we're out in the field. It's called, it's based on GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So when we're going through and designing a whole network build out, whether it's RF, fiber, whatever it might be, we plot out all the different sites, all the locations we're trying to get communications to. And then we actually have to go in there and figure out by the actual physical topology, does it make more sense to build a fiber cable and have to go through and build that the entire direction between places? Or does it make more sense to put up some type of a tower and actually use radio communications between sites? So that's one of the engineering things we run into. We've got a whole suite of different GIS applications we use to achieve this. And I was trying to get this one to load, and I had it preloaded because I knew it was going to take a minute when we were doing this meeting. So we'll let that load in the background here. Hopefully it'll load, and we'll just kind of move on, come back to it in a minute. So microwave was the point-to-point thing we were talking about. The other piece was what we call field area networks. This is like LTE, like cell coverage, or LMR, which stands for land mobile radio. And LMR is basically a technology. It's been around for a long time. It's, way back in the 40s and 50s even. It was all analog based. Now it's digital. That's really, if you think of anyone that has like a fleet of trucks and they have radios in their trucks that can pick up and talk to other people, or like the ambulances, police stations, any of those folks, firefighters, they use a type of land mobile radio to be able to communicate with each other without relying on cell phone communications. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier, like during a disaster scenario, that the power company has something like that too. And that's very similar to cell in the way it works. This app is still, it's actually loaded. Okay, here we go. So this is just the area cover. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit here. For one of my clients, I thought it'd be kind of neat to show a map of a prop study and what propagation studies look like. So this happens to be out in this area I'm going to look at here is in Western Pennsylvania. And the reason I picked this particular area to show, and I want to show just some basic map behind it, is it's kind of hilly in a topology, which makes the prop studies pretty interesting. I'll go ahead and pull one on here for Washington. So we went and we ran hundreds of propagation studies based on some different sites we had available to choose from. I just wanted to pull one on here, kind of show you what that propagation study looks like. And we can turn on, for example, if we want to figure out, maybe we have a whole bunch of locations we want to be able to get communications to. We're not sure how to go about that. We can run a prop study from our centralized point here. And you see the areas that have coverage, the areas that don't. But the propagation study, it's all about, hey, we have a central point. How do we get from that central point outward to all these different locations? So if we had all these little squares you see out here as places we're trying to get communications to, we're trying to figure that out as an option. We ran a propagation study. We know there's a tower here right in the middle, the existing tower. We said, hey, if we put an antenna up at 60 feet and we just make it omnidirectional, meaning basically it looks like a stick that goes up in the air, it shoots out in every direction. How much can we cover on this? A really good coverage is going to be in the reds and then going on outwards into the greens and blues as it gets worse and worse. And you can tell how we have a legend here kind of shows how the signal degrades over time. In this case, with signal both in fiber, RF, whatever you want to talk about, it goes by dB or dBm, and the better number is actually going to be look higher. So it goes actually in a negative scale. So the worse negative you get, the lower your signal. So negative 35 is really strong. Negative 85 is really bad. So as we get further and further out, further and further negative in scale, basically it's more and more loss. As we get more and more and more loss on our signal, our signal in our study gets worse. So that's just one example of an Omni. We put up a tower here. It's like, hey, what can we do? What can we hit from here? You can see this is up on top of a mountaintop in Pennsylvania. So there really is a lot of things we could cover off of that. But one other thing we look at, if we go beyond just an omnidirectional, we want to look at, hey, what if we do sectorized antennas instead? Just throw a good example on here. We'll use Cycle Hill Church. It's in the same area. I want to bring this up as well, because a lot of times on cell phone antennas, a cell antenna, you'll see there's like up on top of that cell tower, there's antennas pointing all different directions on that tower. The reason they do that, it's twofold. One, if you just put up a single antenna, the chances are that's going to get overloaded with too many people on it, and it won't be able to support that many calls or that much data going across it. And then two, you actually get higher performance if you, instead of having an antenna that propagates every single direction, you could aim them in like sectors. So what we were looking at here is a 120-degree sector. So we could have 3 antennas, one in every direction to cover 360, to actually get a propagation study that would get a little bit better signal out to our sites, and also alleviate how many devices are on one antenna. So here's an example. We're pointing. This one was kind of pointing to the southwest. We can flip over and show the other zones as we turn them on. We just called them red, white, and blue for the references we were doing this. That was our sector pointing to the north. And then our sector kind of pointing to the east and south here. That could be loud. I'll shut the door there. Yeah. Our weather alert just went off up here. We got some storms coming through. I'm just gonna shut our door so it isn't too loud. But all right. So that's kind of the RF side of things. I guess the other thing I want to pull up here a little bit is maybe the fiber side. Any questions on RF on the radio side?
So is there a rule of thumb on your degradation on normal dry nitrogen-filled air? Like, how fast does the signal degrade? And this, what wavelength are we looking at here? These are LTE 4G wavelengths, so somewhat high energy.
So this wavelength was actually 700 megahertz, not quite as high as you'd see at 4G. 4G. So the 4G spectrum is pretty wide. We're not talking just, it's different chunks. Depends on the carrier. Some of it's in the 900 megahertz band. There's a lot more up in the, as we get into the gigahertz range, a lot more band up there too. So it kind of depends. The carriers themselves, like the Verizons, the AT&Ts, they kind of purposely did that so they can have, if they have a lower place on the spectrum, it can go a lot further. Whereas if you're higher on the spectrum, they can get a lot more bandwidth across. So they like having a mixture of pieces they can choose from. Typically on a 700 megahertz, just from air losses, what we've been seeing, we're getting about 6, 7, up to 10 miles if you're really high up and clear line of sight. Roughly 10 miles is probably our max we'd go with 700 megahertz. With this type of power output, a lot of times we're limited by the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. They actually control how much you can emit, how much power you can put out on the waves, out into the air. So that's really our limiting factor. It's not so much physics in this case. It's the FCC saying, to keep all this regulated, you're only allowed to maybe transmit 1 watt versus, some of these big radio stations you hear about on the radio, they'll advertise, hey, we're a 500 watt powerhouse. We can shoot our AM signal all across the country. And we're not allowed to do that in a lot of this situation. It's really trimmed down. So I think these were like 1 watt transmitters. On some of the microwave stuff we were talking about point to point, I think they're at like 30 watts is what they transmit for power. So it's a little bit higher, but it's a point to point, narrow, not going every direction. So I guess to short answer is it depends on what you're doing. Any other questions here? Okay, I'll just hit fiber here real quick, and this is another one we work on a lot. We got a presentation we could go through here, but I guess I just want to hit kind of the basics of fiber. Is anyone familiar with fiber optics? Ever seen a fiber cable? Anyone have it at their house? Starting to get into light refraction reflectivity yet at all? So this is one of the big ones. I'm not going to go through this whole presentation. I just want to pull a couple slides out of here of fiber optics and how fiber works. Let me get to those slides here real quick. So the spectrum is one thing I wanted to kind of talk about here a little bit. So the visible spectrum, as you're working with a light, that's probably what you're doing most of the time in your physics labs, is actually working the visible spectrum, which goes up to about 800 nanometers. And then beyond that's where we really start using fiber optics. The very lowest level of fiber optic frequencies or wavelengths is actually visible red light, like an LED light. And as you get further and further into higher wavelengths here, that's when our distances get a lot further as far as what we can achieve. And that's getting further away from the red light into more of a laser situation that you can't visibly see. But what I wanted to pull up, not all the equations on it, but let me see if I can find my slide. It shows how fiber propagates. Apologize. I grabbed this off of one of our vendor presentations because I wanted to just give a high level. There's a lot of detail in here about fiber. Here we go. That we use for training our engineers and stuff too. It's really good information. But what I want to get on fiber optics, they have, and we've been doing this a lot in our demonstrations, actually taking some of the fiber examples out and letting everybody kind of get their hands on them. But fiber is all about having this core piece inside of it, which is really made of fiberglass. And then around that, they have what they call a cladding, which the core is what actually has a light go through it. The cladding is basically a plastic, if you will, that goes around it that keeps that light inside of the core. And then a coating on the outside is just to protect it all. But what happens, there's different sizes of cores and claddings, but what happens though, as this works, when light gets shined down through the core of that fiber, it bounces back and forth off the sides. And that's how the light actually propagates from one place to another. So we're going to put fiber optics in from, say, your house, maybe into the middle of town where the main telco has their office at. It bounces back and forth on the outside of that cladding all the way through until it gets to that location. It really kind of depends upon the type of optics you use, how far you can go in fiber. They have two different types. One's called multimode, one called single mode. Multimode is very similar to this. It can have multiple different light bouncing back and forth inside of it, whereas single mode is really shot almost straight down that middle of that core, and you only see like one line bouncing back and forth instead. That's kind of the overall principles of it. So here's a good example. This is the multimode on top, the single mode on the bottom. Multimode, you're usually limited to, in fiber's all in kilometers, everything, it's all metric, the way they describe it. So multimode, you're usually limited to about a kilometer. Single mode, anywhere up to around 120 kilometers is a normal kind of distance. So 120 kilometers, what are we, 40, 50 miles, something like that. But math, it's always a conversion I have to think about, because everything on the RF side we do in miles, everything in fibers in metrics. It's like, this is fun. But you see questions on fiber? I didn't get too deep into things. I know we kind of probably limited on time.
And that's kind of where we're at right now, is talking about we're doing reflection and bending of light right now. And we'll get to some discussion on refraction. So some of them are going to be checking off in about 5 minutes. I want you to get to some information about your foundations and get some feedback from them. So, and then we can stay on as long as you've got information. I got lots of questions. So,
all right.
Perfect. So yeah, a little bit about our organization, because I do want to get some info from y'all. We are basically going out into more rural areas, whether it be really, really small schools like Brandon's, La Crosse, some medium level schools like Pratt, or bigger schools like Dodge City. And we're taking teams out and talking to students about STEM careers, the education pathways, offering any mentorships or advice that we can give, even offering some job shadowing opportunities, and then eventually, assuming that we have some generous donors, helping out with some scholarships for different STEM events, and maybe assisting with some dual credit classes and things like that. So we are just kind of getting up and running. I spoke with Mr. Sharp quite a bit yesterday about things that, from a teacher's perspective, how we could help students, because that's what our purpose is. We kind of felt like up in Kansas City, our students and our kids up here are constantly inundated with, for instance, Burns and McDonald will go into a school and they will have almost continuous relationships with their students regarding, doing STEM projects and experiments, STEM camps, going to Science City down at Union Station here, providing job opportunities and mentorships. And so we feel like that is not quite what we got in La Crosse or Pratt. And so I know it's a lot better now than when we were there. You guys have a lot more than we even had with the 3D printers and things like that. But the question, I guess, for you guys is, at this point, maybe even thinking back to middle school and things like that. We'll get to the high school part, but for middle schoolers, what would you have wanted from a group like us? What would have interested you, I guess, or what would you have been interested in being more involved with, if that makes sense? How could we have helped you in middle school?
So yeah, go ahead and take your mute buttons off and talk to them a little bit, because when Lindsay was talking to me about this, I really thought of this group because, like I told her, this group is ambitious, they're intelligent, they're well-spoken. If she wants feedback from a group, that you all would give her good feedback. So think back from your educational journey. What enrichment activities you feel like maybe you were limited on that Foundation might be able to provide? Lucas, in particular, I think about some of the trips you've made and what you've been able to experience. What else would have you liked for enrichment?
Put you on the spot.
Give me a second. In middle school, Liberty ended up, I don't know if they offered a STEM class when you guys, or when you went there, but they offered a STEM class. They offered a STEM class in middle school when I went there, and I took it, but not very many kids took it because you didn't get very many electives. And so I think, like, being able to have everybody get to experience that, rather than, oh, you have to choose in between band, choir, or STEM or whatever. I think letting everybody else experience that and not having to take that class and be limited in your options, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I know that we had a careers class as well, but it only lasted a quarter of the year. So you had a quarter of the year, your 8th grade year, to figure out where you wanted to job shadow, because that was part of your grade. And you had to set it up, and you did some research on it and stuff like that. I think that was a good opportunity, but I would have liked it to be a little bit longer. Maybe not be limited to just one job shadow, if that makes sense. Maybe have like a fair or something like that. I think that would have been nice, so you had more options and didn't feel like you had to decide in 8th grade what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think along those same lines of a job like shadow fair, I guess, is I want to be an aerospace engineer, and there's not really a whole lot of options in Pratt, Kansas for that. And so I never got to do a job shadow with anyone in middle school. And so I think, yeah, if they brought people in to like talk to everybody, I guess, for like a job shadow fair, I kind of agree with that idea.
Would you been excited, Lucas, to take a trip maybe to visit an engineer if they could have
helped
you get to Wichita or to Kansas City to a place where somebody was on the job doing it?
Right, yeah. If we had been able, like, had I been able to go one day to go talk to them, yeah, I would have liked that as well.
That's something I know that even my company provides, is the opportunity. I think they normally gear it towards high school, different ages in high school. to come through
Right.
and rotate through the different, like spend a day in the office and go through several different departments and just see what everybody does. It's kind of, once again, that's the thing, not having that in the rural areas, it's tough, but if we can provide opportunities to get folks to come up to it, probably good.
Do you think it would be helpful to have or be able to offer like a mentor, say an aerospace engineer, to kind of maybe follow you along your career path and available, I guess, for you to check in with? Or would it be more helpful just to say, here's a job shadow, and then, you're good to go?
I think having them follow along to like point you in like the right direction and be able to like ask them certain questions. I think that would be helpful to like keep yourself, oh, this is where I need to be and what I'm doing. So I also like that idea, and I think the job shadow, like it's a one-time event, but I think job shadows are more about trying to determine if that's something that you really like are interested in and you want to keep pursuing. But along the lines of what you're saying, if you do end up wanting to pursue that, having the ability to like have a mentor to like point you in the right direction definitely helps if that's what you want to pursue.
So what do y'all want now? What would be helpful now for you guys as juniors and seniors? Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
What sort of like if you're looking at our program at our website, what would you be looking for? What would you click on that said, yeah, that's something I want? You guys are all good to go, huh?
I guess, does anyone know what they want to do at this point? Aerospace engineering, but is there anyone else that has an idea of what they want to do or direction to get there?
And that's something I want to bring up with both your stories. Was like when you left college, you knew an area that you really liked, but you didn't necessarily know the job you're going to end up in. So who else does really know what they want to do?
When I was in 8th grade, I job shadowed at a landscape architecture firm in Wichita. I think his name was David Foster. And so I've been kind of curious about going into that field, but every once in a while I'm like, well, am I just doing that because that's what I wanted to do in 8th grade or what? So I'm kind of along the lines of don't know what I want to do, but I'm kind of also pursuing that. So
yeah, I think I want to be a lawyer. I'm not sure what kind of lawyer, but yeah.
So maybe kind of more career exploration and knowing options and things like that would be helpful for you all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As we're discussing things, I'm wondering, because we take the career studies class, and then you have that survey where they give you, okay, we think these are the jobs that fit your interests. That might be a good jumping point because you've already kind of got some landmarks marked around there where somebody that's supposed to know what they're doing has said, hey, based on your abilities and your interests, these are careers you should follow.
Mm-hmm.
So
that honestly never really works for me.
That didn't really work for you?
No, I took it my 8th grade year, and landscape architecture was not on it, period. Like I was like martial arts instructor, and
that's what Kylie was too.
I was either going to be some kind of teacher or some kind of like handy woman.
All right.
So those have never really fit me.
Andreas, do you have anything to add? What do you want right now? What if you went to a website that was STEM students and they said, we can give you something, what do you want? What would you want to help you make your decision?
I guess like guidance of like where I need to go, because like, so I'm a senior right now, so I'll be going to college next year in psychology. So maybe like the path I need to go to, like a way that I need to follow to get to where I need to go would be good.
Yeah, and so that's kind of going back to the little mentoring thing, saying, hey, these are the steps you need to make sure you take care of. get these things? Like, are you talking about curriculum wise, like take these classes, then these classes, or are you talking about choosing the right school, or are you talking about the whole package of how to get from point A to point C?
I'd say the whole package, like of like what's the best school, and then what classes I should be taking, so I'm not wasting my time there
Okay.
in college, and then what jobs I should be taking so I can get experience and stuff.
Okay.
That's a really good point too, as far as what jobs even now, or as you're going to college. Sure, you could always have a job that's just like a normal, like a work. It's a normal job, but if it doesn't apply to what you're doing, it's hard to. I don't think you get a lot of advantages out of it as far as career growth later on. One I didn't mention, I worked when I was in Manhattan. I took one year up there and did a co-op, and I worked with GE aviation branch up there in Manhattan, and we did avionics system design for aircraft. So that was something that didn't really end up applying directly to what I did, but having that experience working with somewhere else in engineering industry was really good, just to kind of learn more about it and see what the options are out there. Yeah, definitely highly encourage any type of job opportunity like that.
I don't think either of us graduated high school thinking we were going to do what we are currently doing today. So paths change and are molded pretty quickly based on your experiences over the next couple of years. I think it stressed me out the first few years out of school, not knowing, because I was always the person that wanted, plan A to plan, not really, I don't want to plan B, I want plan A, I want to know exactly where I'm going and how to get there. And so it stressed me out a little bit to come upon those little turns where I'm thinking, maybe that's not quite what I was thinking I wanted. But you have to take those turns and curves along the way, and you'll get to where you're supposed to get eventually. But don't be scared and don't be stressed out about it, for sure. I was in the same boat as many of you, thinking, I think maybe, but I'm not quite sure. So just get into maybe even a general program in college and do the volunteer work on the side or the extracurriculars, and you'll jump upon something eventually that you're like, yep, that's it, that's for sure. And you're not going to have the question in the back of your mind that I'm pretty sure it'll be there in front of you.
All right. Hey, I'm going to wrap up the recording part of this. So I want to thank you all for sitting in with us today. Like I said, I'm going to stay on afterwards and clear anything else up. Students, I want you to feel free to sign out if you need to. I know it's the end of what you consider your school day, and you may have things lined up that you want to do, but feel free to stick around and keep asking questions and getting feedback. But thank you, Lindsay and Brandon, for being with us today. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for the input. We really appreciate it.
High physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.